Late last week, Amsterdam experienced what the city's mayor has called a, quote, outburst of anti-Semitism. It happened in the wake of a soccer game between Maccabi Tel Aviv, an Israeli team, and a Dutch one called Ajax. Authorities said criminals on scooters hunted the city for supporters of the Israeli team and committed hit-and-run attacks.
Free Palestine now!
The attacks left many Maccabi supporters injured. Earlier, the Israeli team supporters were seen on videos chanting anti-Arab slurs and praising Israel's attacks in Gaza. Then, this past Thursday in Paris, despite tight security, more tension spilled into violence at another soccer game between France and Israel. For more on what all of this means, I want to bring in Michal Cotler-Wunsh. She is Israel's special envoy for combating anti-Semitism and a former member of the Knesset. Michal, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us on this really important issue. While so many around the world were so shocked to see the anti-Semitic violence in Amsterdam last week, you were not surprised. Why is that?
So I say that devastatingly, of course. It was a shocking event, but as you just said, Bianna, indeed, I was not surprised because we would be remiss if we looked at what happened on the streets of Amsterdam just last week as a single one-off event, if you will. It is a part of what has been a tsunami of anti-Semitism ever since the October 7th massacre, in which the State of Israel was infiltrated, and war crimes and crimes against humanity that murdered and butchered and raped and burned alive and abducted hundreds of Israelis occurred. And unfathomably, in response to that attack, to those war crimes, to those crimes against humanity, which was a Kristallnacht moment of our times, instead of global outrage, what we have seen systematically throughout the more than a year is a tsunami of anti-Semitism. Hundreds of percentages rise of targeting of individual Jews, of businesses, of anybody who self-defines or is identified as a Zionist, believing that the State of Israel has a right to exist. And at this moment in time, what we need to be very clear on is that what happened in Amsterdam is just a part of that tsunami.
And you're right to mention the skyrocketing surge in anti-Semitism that we've seen since October 7th. But we've seen that trajectory even before October 7th, steadily an increase in anti-Semitism over the course of the last several years. Is it naive, though, given the scope of what we've seen in just this last year, to assume that much of it will dissipate once this war comes to an end? And I ask you that because you have really honed in on this issue of anti-Semitism having an ability to morph into various forms. Explain that.
So just to say, you're 100% right that we saw a gradual or consistent increase in anti-Semitism around the world in the 5 to 10 years before the October 7th massacre, of course. And indeed, I am one of about 35 special envoys for combating anti-Semitism from around the world, the United States, Canada, the EU, and so on, because of that constant rise. And you are right, Bianna, that anti-Semitism is an ever-mutating viral hate. It has existed for as long as Jews have existed, for thousands of years. And it mutates by latching on to the guiding social construct of each time: religion, science, and in our case, the modern-day secular religion of human rights. And so we have this new strain of anti-Semitism that is anti-Zionism, that actually denies Israel's very right to exist as an equal member state in the family of nations, so that the mechanism that demonizes and delegitimizes and applies double standards, whether it is to the individual Jew, barring them from an equal place in society, or demonizing, delegitimizing, and applying double standards to the Jewish nation state, the proverbial Jew among the nations, if you will, barring it from an equal place in the family of nations. Now, we have seen this happening for decades. And if I had to begin with a moment in time, it is the 1975 Zionism is Racism UN resolution, Soviet propaganda that passed at the UN, that is alive and well on 2024 university campuses and online platforms in the name of progress.
Just as it relates to what we saw transpire in Amsterdam, Tom Friedman of the New York Times cited the following comments by former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert in an article this week I'd like to read to you. What happened in Amsterdam is primarily a reflection of hatred by many Muslims against the state of Israel and its citizens because of what is transpiring in our region. It is not a continuation of the historical anti-Semitism that swept Europe in past centuries, the sources of which are Christian religious fanaticism and the lack of tolerance for the Jewish people in general. What do you make of that? Do you agree with his assessment?
So clearly, I beg to differ. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, the result of a very long democratic process that's actually been adopted by more than 40 countries and more than 1,200 entities, actually enables us to understand that there is one definition of anti-Semitism with 11 different examples that are given there, from the Middle Ages understanding that the Jew was the Christ killer and so on, to the understanding that the demonization and the delegitimization and the double standards that now targets the Jew among the nations, the single Jewish nation state, is the new form, if you will, of this ever-mutating virus, shape-shifting virus. And so not only do I beg to differ, I actually think that it disables us from being able to identify the strain of anti-Semitism that is running rampant in the streets of Europe and the United States and Canada and Australia, because the justification of the attack of Jews, because of what it is that's happening in the state of Israel, is part and parcel of that IRA working definition of anti-Semitism, only exposing and underscoring how misguided actually that notion is. Anti-Semitism has one definition, and it matters not if it comes from the extreme right, the radical left, or the radical Islamists. They all intersect at anti-Semitism, at this lethal hatred that actually is, we know historically, the most reliable warning signs, not just for Jews, but actually for freedom and humanity and the dignity of difference.
Well, you're right to note we've seen an alarming rise in anti-Semitism on the far right and far left elements of governments around the world. Michal, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Bianna. And really, I encourage everybody watching us, the time to speak up is now, and is very, very often I say never again is right now as we witness this tsunami of anti-Semitism, and each and every one of us can make a difference when we speak up.